Right, so let's make a start. We are still covering the developmental areas in child's development in early years. Today, I will be talking about language development and communication. I just would like to remind you that we had made a start to language development briefly when we were covering cognitive development, because language is one of our cognitions, is one of our cognitive functions. So if you look at the textbooks, if you look at psychology books, if you look at some academic sources, don't be surprised if you see language development covered under cognitive development, because it's one of our cognitive functions. And remember when I was telling you about cognitive development, cognition is our brain, our mind's way of knowing, and the way we learn about the world, the way we know about the world. And we said that we do this by memory, using our memory. We do this by perception, using our five senses. We do this by paying attention. We do this by solving problems. We do this by decision making. We do this by creativity, imagination. Another way we do it is our language. Language is also helping us to know about the world. So language is a cognition. That's why it is one of the cognitive developmental areas as well. But some resources will focus on it separately. And because it's a very large area of development, there's so many things we can learn about it. It's a very broad area. But just so you know, it's very much under the category of cognitive development. When we say communication, let's start from communication, then let's bring it to language development. What do we mean by communication? Let's just ask ourselves first, who have we communicated today? What have you communicated today? Have you communicated with anyone? Maybe you have your parents around you, maybe you have your partner, maybe you have your housemates, maybe you have your sibling, friend, or maybe you are just saying on your end you haven't communicated with anyone. Maybe just communicated with yourself, you know, that's also possible. Think about the reasons of your communication. Why do we communicate with people? So then you can see every time we communicate with someone, there will be a different reason. Sometimes the same reasons, but sometimes different reasons. It's a very rich topic. Is actually you have different reasons of communication every day. So let's have a look at what is communication. Let's have a look at what is language and the basic theories about language development. So communication is the process by which people can interactively create, sustain, and manage meaning. So in communication, we create something, we create a meaning, we create a situation. And through this meaning, we also make things happen, either connection with other people or making things happen, like taking an action. So communication can lead to different things. It's very important that communication cannot be just verbal. We always assume that communication is verbal, but sometimes the way a person looks at you, the way a person uses the gestures, the way a person uses body language, the way a person uses mimics, facial expressions. These are all nonverbal parts of communication, but nevertheless, we are also considering them as communication. So communication is not just our verbal language. And it's, even if it's language, it doesn't always have to be verbal as well. As we know, we also have sign language. So when we say communication, don't just think about our languages, written languages. There are different ways of communication. Communication exists also not just in humans, also in animals. I believe it also exists in nature as well. If you go to a park, you will see the trees, all the beautiful green around you, all the organisms, they have roots in the soil. And a lot of research shows that actually this is their way of communication. Trees are communicating under the soil through their roots. Communication is also not just belong to humans. Every organism communicates, but in a different way. So what we are mostly focusing on today are communication in early years. And as you know, from infancy, when babies come to world, and in their first days, communication is pretty much nonverbal until they start figuring their language. And that's why nonverbal communication can never be underestimated. This is the root of our communication, nonverbal. We start with nonverbal communication when we come to the world. The way we look at each other, the way we show affection, the way we express our emotions, the way we express proximity, gestures, mimics, everything is very important for a baby. So because baby understands about the world, about the safety, about the security of the world through these nonverbal communications. The moment you look into the baby's eyes with some stress and nervousness, if you are afraid of something, babies will easily understand, no need to say anything, because they are coming to world with nonverbal communication skills, which is actually very interesting. And that's why some people theorize that language is quite actually genetic as well. We will talk about theories in the end. Let's have a look a little bit more to nonverbal communication. So in nonverbal communication, we have different elements. For instance, we have elements about our vocal pitch. So today I'm not doing very well in my vocal pitch. I don't know why. My voice is very scratchy. So voice pitch is like the loudness of your voice and the rate of your voice, like how fast you speak, how many pauses you take, what is your volume, how is the tone of your voice. Sometimes people use a different tone. Some people have a very soft, calm voice, but some people have a very strong tone of voice, which also creates a huge different meaning. There are very interesting studies conducted about vocals and the way they convey trust on the individual. Actually, I have a friend who is researching about the vocals and the accents, and they have done studies about British accent and how much trust they convey in people who listen to them. I can proudly say Northern accents have been found as very trustworthy. People who have no idea about North, South, West, East accents in England, they've listened to different accents, and one of the accents they found trustable was the Northwest accent. So it's really interesting that you have interesting things hidden in the language, and just using the voice, using the accent can really tell a lot to other people. And how many times we use silence. If you hear people talking without any pauses, you would assume the person is anxious, and then you immediately start feeling anxious as well. So these things are very much transferable. Laughs, the screams, sighs, these kind of vocal elements are one of the fundamental features of our nonverbal communication. The distance we put between other people, basically between the communicators, whether we use our tactile senses. Some people do touch the other one, like just a little tap in the shoulder, on the arm, depends on who you talk with and how close with you are with the person. But notice that some people are very touchy when they talk. It's just the way they are. They're very friendly, and it creates a different atmosphere. It depends on the person. If that person kind of conveys a little bit trust in you, you wouldn't mind that. But if it's a person who doesn't convey trust, you don't really trust the person, then you would find this very disturbing. So again, it's a very interesting part of nonverbal communication. The way we perceive time, the way we operate with time, fast, slow, today, tomorrow, yesterday, these kind of things can be a part of nonverbal communication as well. Gestures, like I use my gestures a lot, and like this, my arms. I feel like sometimes if you put my arms and if you don't let me use them, I would struggle talking. Eye contact, facial expressions, our body language, which is super important. And pay attention to people who you see, if the world goes back to normal, of course, in hospitality business, how they use the body language, how they use these facial expressions. If you notice you really like someone, you find that person very friendly, very likable, I think you will also notice that the person will have some very likable body language, eye contact, facial expressions as well. Also, the way we dress, the way we belong, the way we appear, the way we do our hair, everything about our physical appearance, the artifacts, which we call, are also playing a role in nonverbal communication. Let's have a look at the language part of communication, which is the verbal communication. Let's try to unpick a little bit more about our language. Language has 4 distinct important elements. Language development. So when you say, oh, the child started speaking, talking, actually we refer to many different things. So phonology is the first aspect of the language, which means refers to sounds of the language. When we talk about the sounds in language, like babies start making sounds like ba, ba, ba. That's one of the first sounds they make. Da, da, da. So phonologically, that's the first development that children come and the children display. So phonology is about the sounds of the language. But when you look at this ba, 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 da, 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 it doesn't make sense, right? There's no meaning. Maybe in some languages, I know this baba means dad, but children don't mean that. They don't mean to use the word. Sometimes they also say names, but often it's the case that they don't understand about the semantics. Semantics is the study of the words and their meaning. What does that mean? So another part of language is grammar, is referring to the rules that we use to describe structure of the language. So in English, we have subject, object, subject, verb, object, verb, order, or in English, we do past tense by adding syntax in the end of the verb. We do plural single by adding s in the end of the words. These are the rules of our language. In every language, there are different rules. But when the final element of language is pragmatics, it's the study of how people use language to communicate effectively. So pragmatics is more than semantics. Don't confuse these two. It's not just about the meaning of the world, it's also about using the language in the right context in a way. So if you look at a child who is maybe like in the school age, like 5 years or 6 years, children at that age look pragmatic more. They, my connection is a bit on and off. They learn to talk about with different people in a different manner. So they know that the way they talk with their teacher is different than the way they talk with their peers and the way they talk with their moms and dads. Because where you lose language, where you lose language, which is the context, the social context, is going to change how you use it. This is called pragmatics. Knowing when to know, how to use the language, how language's meaning is different in different contexts, in different occasions. Okay, we already talked about the grammar. So how children learn language and communication, how children come to the world and learn these phonology, semantics, grammar, pragmatics, which seem to be very complicated. But they do excel quite well in language in the first 3 years, 4 years of life. They keep learning though. The speed of learning language is quite fast in the first years. So different theories had a different approach, understanding how children learning language and communication. So we will explore a bit of these theories and you will see the differences between different approaches. Let's start with looking at behavioral learning theories. So behavioral learning theories are the ones that use punishment, reward, conditioning, these kind of phenomena to understand language. So for instance, Skinner, who is a behavioral psychologist, who has conjoined the term operant conditioning, which came to this term by doing a lot of research in the lab using animals like pigeons. Mostly he used pigeons, also rats, other animals that he can condition. What he did is the more you give animal a reward, the more you can shape the behavior of the animal. If you have a pet, if you have a dog, I don't think cats are easy to condition, but it very much applies to dogs. When you take your dog to training center, or you do it at home by yourself, doesn't matter. If you repeat the behavior using a reward, every time you want to, for instance, you want to teach your dog to sit down and to fall down. Some dogs are very anxious, we need to teach them. If you want to teach, the moment you say sit down to the dog, you give a reward, like some food, it's the dog's favorite food. Over the time, if you repeat it again and again and again, the dog will learn. The dog will be conditioned to the situation that if I sit down, my owner will give me a food. This is operant conditioning. Children learn language, according to the behavioral learning theories, children learn language through conditioning. So the moment they use a word in a correct way, parents will reward them. Ah, you said my name, you said mommy, well done to you, something like this. It could be a verb phrase, or it could be giving a gift or a reward, an actual reward to the child. Ah, you said, mommy, well done to you. Here you go, one more cookie for you, something like this. So basically, according to behavioral learning theories, children learn language through these rewards they receive, either verbal rewards or material rewards. Every time they say something correct, they get a reward from the adults, and they keep getting conditioned to you, and they get conditioned to use the language in the right way. Another way of learning language into behavioral theories, this is different than conditioning and reinforcement. So in the first one, we were saying we reinforce the children to learn the language by using rewards. But we use the rewards only when the child is doing the right language use, not when the child is using the language in the wrong way. The moment the child is able to come up with the right words, right sentences, we reward. In observation side of behavioral learning theory, so some people who are also believing in behavioral learning, they wanted to explain things more from observation imitation perspective. I said so Bandura is the most important behavioral learning theorist who believed in the power of observation and imitation. He said that children learn by observing the others. And children have a very high tendency to imitate and model what they see around. When they see their parents use the language in a certain way, they will model the parents. So they say, according to Bandura, language development is learned by modeling the people around us, our parents, grandparents, teachers, other children. By observing the others, they learn about the language. They learn about new things in that language. They observe and imitate and model. So basically, Bandura says we need role models in language. The more, that's why we always say when you have young children, it's very important to talk with them because they will model you, they will follow you. So behavioral learning theories pretty much explained child's language development through observable things, either observing a model or getting a reward every time you use language in the correct way. Pretty much outside effect, there's not much they said about what's happening in internal world of the child. They adapt language learning to what they receive from outside, a reward or a good language model. That's why they were criticized. There are some cases that adults don't really reinforce children for able to use the language in a good way, but children still keep learning. You have to always reward the child so that because they use language in the correct way. That's very demanding. That's very overwhelming. We don't do that. I'm not saying we never use reinforcement rewards. We sometimes use it with children, but we don't rely on them all the time. And parents, do they only reinforce the correct utterances? Sometimes they reinforce incorrect ones as well, because I don't know, they have their preferences. And also look at from the observation theory. Bandura said that if the child has a good role model in language, they will be able to learn the language. That's great. Everyone needs good role models. What the case that children are brought up with parents who are not really models of language. Maybe one of them is not even able to speak. Maybe they haven't, some cultures are like that. They don't talk with their children. So is it how we learn the language? We'll end up learning the language. That's why they were criticized. Sometimes we can't get these external world things like rewards or good models in order to advance our language. So this is one criticism they received. So language learning theories, one more thing I wanted to say, behavioral learning theories, they preferred focusing on the role of nurture. You remember the nature-nurture discussion? Is it the genes or is it the environment? And we always say children develop thanks to a combination of their genes, so their genetics, their innate traits, plus the environment imposed family, schooling, and all these things that comes when we come to world. So behavioral theories found that environment, what's happening in the environment, is more responsible for language development. As we look at the nativist theories now, nativist theories is completely different. They see language is more of a genetic, more of an innate skill we come to life. Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, very important researcher, theorist, philosopher. I think you should be really aware of him. Maybe go and have a few talks from him. Still quite active. Sometimes I see him giving opinions about political situations as well. Yeah, I would recommend to learn about him. He said the ability to learn language is instinctive. Just like how animals in the world, they don't have parents teaching them, but birds will know how to do the bird's language. Animals will know how to use things. It's like they come to the world with instinct. So Chomsky said it's the same with the humans. And he actually said, I believe humans are born with something called language acquisition device. It's not like a device in our brain. It's not like a chip in our brain or something like this. He didn't mean like an actual physical device. He meant more like symbolically. He said a structure within our brain. He didn't specify what structure, but basically our brains, our genetic makeup, allows babies to absorb and understand the rules of the language they are being exposed to, because we are born with the ability to learn the language. So he said this is more like a genetic trait that we come to world. Very different to observational theories, which are saying we learn language by looking at parents. We learn language thanks to getting rewards. Whereas Chomsky said, no, we don't learn language like this. We are born with the language. It's innate. And he said that language acquisition device, even if you are born in different cultures, has features that are common to all languages. And Chomsky said it's a universal grammar that we are born with. So we know that in every language, although they are different, there will be an object, there will be a verb, there will be a subject. These are innate grammar categories and existing in every language, because in every language there will be an action that we want to talk about. There will be people we want to talk about. There will be objects. The way they use will be different, but this is pretty much in every language. Even if you speak Japanese, Mandarin, if you speak Spanish, English, in every language there are similar things. Chomsky said we come to the world with our knowledge of universal grammar. We know that the universal grammar, that a language has object, subjects, verb, or some other rules that he described. We learn the specifics later. So the specifics of English language I will learn later, but I'm already coming to world with a language acquisition device, he said. My brain is ready to learn that language. And he said that this explains why children can quickly understand and use the language creatively and correctly, sometimes without ever being formally taught. We don't really teach children language. He had a point. They learn it by themselves most of the time, but that doesn't mean they come to world already knowing. They still need environmental stimuli. But we also have a very important theory that kind of criticizes nativist theory. So Chomsky was right. We come to the world with our innate tendency to learn language. Perhaps we have a brain structure that allows us to learn language. We are born with this. And if the child comes to the world with a damage to that brain structure, they will have struggled to learn the language. But he missed a very important point. He missed the point of critical period for language learning. Studies show that if children are not receiving any language input, they've done studies with children who have experienced severe neglect cases. It's very disturbing to talk about it, but there are a few cases that happen in the world that the children has been, they grown up locked up in a room or something like this without seeing any individual. So these are very extreme, disturbing cases, but we use them for understanding about language development. I think there was a case of, they were saying, they called her Jeannie, obviously it's a nickname. Jeannie has been abused severely by the parents, and I think she lived until 12, 11 years old, isolated in a room, locked up in a room with no community. So they did research with that extreme case of a child, and then they found that she's not able to learn language as we do. She missed that chance of learning the language. She is able to learn things, but her level of language is quite delayed compared to the normal development of language. So there are a few extreme cases like that. Even if it's 11 years old, there are some other children who are not receiving a lot of language input as well. Researchers consistently found that if children do miss that critical time for learning the language, if you don't talk with a child until 3-4 years old at all, you definitely cause a huge delay in their development, and they will not, studies show that they will not be able to catch up in some instances. They will be always delayed. So this is called critical period for language learning. So early years, especially first 3-4 years, are the critical period for learning language. So we can't always learn language in the same way. That's why if you want to teach a child a second language, it's much better to start in the early years as well, because we have a critical period is the time for learning the language. We also call there sensitive periods, times that we are more able to do things. Language is one of them. So if you want to teach second language to a child, we start early because they are able to learn much easier in the early years. I've seen children speaking 3 languages when they were 4 years old. Unbelievable talent. But this is how we are born. So how nativist theories are criticized? First of all, Chomsky's claim that language is actually universal. There are universal things about language which are same in every different language, has been criticized. People said that, no, actually it's not that universal. Excuse me, I just need to put my plug. My battery is running out. Right. So people have criticized his approach of universal language. What is universal? They said, what are the parameters that are universal? We found that these different languages have quite different features. How do we decide what is the universal? Another criticism nativist theories received is that they have underestimated the role of learning or the environment. They have given so much importance over our innate genetic makeup, which means our innate ability to learn language. They did underestimate how much we can learn from our environment, how much we can learn from the adults in the environment. Another theory that we will use is understand language development. So let's see how interactions theories compare to observational theories and to nativist. So this is the third one we are covering now. Children move from innate pre-linguistic skills to making meaning within the cultural context of their daily lives. Babies come into the world with schemas to figure out intentions of others, like peekaboo and hide and seek. So Brunner is one of the important theorists, researchers, theorists that I can mention in interaction theories. He says that adults provide them a language acquisition support system. So interactionist theories are, I would say, are pretty much midway between observational theorists, which were giving all the importance to environment in learning the language, plus nativist theories who were saying language is pretty much inborn. So one side, nativist theories were saying it's the nature. Observational theories were saying it's the nurture. Whereas in modern approaches to child development, we know that it's always both the nature and the nurture. It's always both how the child comes into the world, what talents, what characters, traits the child brings into the world with biological features, plus what we provide to the child, what happens in the environment. So interactionist theories say that language development is a combination of both our nature and nurture. Brunner said parents employ this language acquisition support system, which is, it's a bit like, if you can go back to Chomsky's theory, language acquisition device. So he suggested we are born with a language device. It's like a structure in our brain. It doesn't really exist, but he kind of gave it like in a symbolic example, as if there's a device in our brain who already knows how to speak. We just need to push the button, something like this. But if you look at interactionist theories, they say, no, there's no such thing. The only thing we can provide is a support system to the child. Child will learn how to use the language by using the environment and the biology, both of these things. So parents can help the child to learn the language by scaffolding. We will use this term a lot, scaffolding term. It's the deliberate use of a language at a level that is slightly beyond what children can comprehend. So a parent can model the child in a way that they use a little bit more advanced language than child can comprehend. Sometimes they say things that child doesn't know. I'll give you an example. Do you know the show Sesame Street? I was brought up by Sesame Street and I've learned so many words from Sesame Street. For your generation, perhaps it's not very relevant, but for my generation, it was a highlight. You know, characters, puppets like Elmo, Cookie Monster, Grover, Little Bird. They are all living in this one famous street called Sesame Street. I'm sure you know the show. If you don't, please go and check from YouTube. It's just hilarious. In Sesame Street, they were doing this scaffolding very successfully. Like they were always inviting some adult, and they wanted to show, when they wanted to show a word to the child, like let's say I'm using a word, advanced word to the child, persistence. I think I for another course I was preparing, I was looking at Sesame Street videos. They were trying to explain the child how to use the word persistent. So it's a difficult word for the children, but they teach it in a way that they show the child. They scaffold the child. So they use a situation that the person who's trying to explain the situation, the word, and I think it was a celebrity, Elmo was interrupting the celebrity person because Elmo was coming with a ball, and then he was saying, when are we going to play? When are we going to play? And then the person who is introducing the word used Elmo as an example. Look, Elmo is being very persistent. So you can use scaffolding in this kind of way. You use the language in a slightly advanced way. You don't really teach the child, but you show the child. And the ways of using scaffolding, the ways of supporting children's language development is using scaffolding, deliberately use advanced language so that they can understand more words, they can expand the vocabulary. But also we use something called infant directed speech. It's like baby talk. It's a modified version of our spoken language. Do you notice when we talk with children, we modify the language? We use a very lively tone, we use a different interesting facial expression. We don't really talk with them as if we talk with an adult. This is very helpful as well, according to interactionists. Believe, look, they take into account the nature of the child, which means the child is not ready to cope with the advanced level you use the language. But if you can go to their own level, if you talk with them in a more child-friendly way, they will learn from you. Another way to engage children with language is musicality. Babies do like more toned, like if you can sing a rhyme, if you sing a song to teach the child the language, use the musical rhythmic flow in communication, they would really benefit from that. I'll give you another example from Sesame Street, because I just really think it's a very good show for language development, for engaging children. They have this alphabet. They were teaching the alphabet as a musical. We know this probably, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that kind of musical way. That will teach the babies because it's very toned, it's very musical, there's a rhythmic flow in communication. It's another good way of engaging the child. There's a YouTube clip that you can engage on your time. So these are the ways that we can teach children language. So I was going to summarize 3 theories we covered. The first one was observational learning theory, which believed in the role of environment, which didn't so much about babies' already innate tendencies to learn language, which is the nature. Second theory, nativist theories, they focused more on the role of our biology, our biological innate ability to learn the language, which is our nature, but they ignore the role of environment, which is nurture. Interactionist theories kind of combine these two. They believe, but that they put more emphasis to nurture, to environment. They believe that children learn through communication and through support system. We need to support them to learn the language. We can't let them learn it alone. So how babies and infants communicate as a result of these theories we covered. Let's have a brief look at the developmental pattern. What do we observe? Infants make sounds from the time they are born. They come to the world being able to make sound unless they have a physical biological condition that doesn't allow them to make a sound. But they don't really talk too much in the first year. They do babbling, which is like mama, da, 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 ba, 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 ba. It's changing according to each child. It's different child, but roughly they say 5, 6, 7 months, they start doing that. We engage with face-to-face interactions, proto-conversations with children, which are non-verbal communications we engage with children. So these are very important because at this stage we don't have verbal communication, but babies are receiving your verbal communication the first year of life. It doesn't mean you should be silent. You should give them as much as talk as you can because they learn from you. They're just not ready to talk back the first year. Another interactionist theory that I'd like to add on top of Brunner is Vygotsky. They are very similar. Vygotsky also believes that children learn and develop by interacting with more knowledgeable adults or peers. We learn from people who know a little bit more than us. But we learn in communication, we learn in language. Remember Piaget from the cognitive development lecture. Piaget was saying children learn by actively exploring on their own. But Vygotsky is not thinking like this. Vygotsky believes we learn more in a social world by talking with others, by engaging with others, through practicing our culture. So according to Vygotsky, we have 4 different stages of speech. We start the world by primitive speech. Up until 2 years, child is beginning to speak very basic, just naming objects, responding to things. They do a lot of pointing. They cry, they laugh, they use emotions as a way of communicating in the first years. After 2 years, they start using words as they start understanding we use language. If I want to talk about this water bottle, I need to say bottle rather than just pointing. And there's a word that represents that object. They understand there are words we use that represent objects in the world. That they are very curious at this stage and they try to ask a lot of questions. Around 4 years old, children go into this egocentric stage. They often talk about themselves. I did this, I saw this, I wanted, I like to, I want to, these kind of things. They talk much more about themselves. They kind of pretty much ignore everything else. And after 7 years old, maybe in some cases 6 years old, children start going into their inner world a little bit slowly, and they start talking to themselves a little bit more. It is the time also children learn to, it's the time they also think in a bit more advanced way, in a more abstract. So you see children become more quiet at this stage and they go into the inner world. They try to solve things in their inside mind. They think about things in their own world, and they don't always need to talk like 4 years old do. They process things a bit more internally. Okay, so pretty much interactions theorists, as I tried to explain, believe in the role of talking with others, believe in the importance of social environment in order to develop the language. They have been criticized as well. They've been criticized that sometimes child-adult interactions are different in different cultures. So, for instance, peekaboo is not something that all the cultures will do. So in some cultures, adults do not engage with communication with the children that much. They don't include children in communications that much. So, but still, these children learn about the world and the language. How do they do it? So there are some cases that interactions between the child and the adult differ, and adults do not go into the supporting scaffolder guide role, but still children end up learning the language. So this is pretty much the interactions theories were criticized for. We don't always have adults who are studying our language development, but we still learn the language. I think this is pretty much what I wanted to say today. There are really nice videos that I included that you can just have a look. And this final table is for you to look at in your own time. You can see approximately what a child is capable of in language development over the different years. And you can see what I said in the beginning of the lecture, there's a high speed of language development in the first years. Look, we start from 100 words in 2 years. Only in 3 years, children advance to using 20,000 words. They also figure out grammar use. They also figure out pragmatics, and they make more longer sentences. So development of language is approximately like that, years to 5 years, but it always changes according to one child, depending on the child, depending on the environment, depending on everything basically. Every child is unique. this is pretty much what I wanted to say. We've covered development with very basics. Of course, language development is such a very broad topic. We also talked a little bit about communication. I'm going to stop recording.